On December 27, 1892, Livingstone and Biddle College, now known as Johnson C. Smith University, played in Salisbury, North Carolina, with Biddle winning 5-0. Over time, HBCU football has evolved. HBCU football's popularity continues to rise. Millions attend games each year and millions more watch on television. The HBCU bands provide some of the top entertainment in the country. Over that time, some of the best players to ever play in the National Football League played at HBCUs. Every Monday through Friday on the HBCU Football Daily Podcast, national radio and television host Donal Ware takes a look at what's happening in HBCU football and talks with coaches, players, administrators, and media about the season. Make sure you join the conversation on social media. Now, here's your host, Donal Ware.
This is the HBCU Football Daily Podcast for today, Monday, August 28th. I'm Donal Ware. The countdown is over. The HBCU football season has begun, and we had three HBCU football games this past Saturday. I want to start this way on this Manic Monday edition of the HBCU Football Daily Podcast. I was way wrong in terms of the prediction. As a matter of fact, Jackson State put a shellacking on South Carolina State 37-7 in the MEAC SWAC Challenge, and it was a good football game for Jackson State. I think it was a little bit of a mixture of a good football game for Jackson State and not a good football game for South Carolina State as well. I don't think the Bulldogs played well at all. When I looked at the first half, I thought Jackson State left some plays and left some opportunities out there on the field where they should have had. It was 17-0 at halftime. I mean, it should have been, at minimum, even with the missed field goal. I mean, at minimum, it should have been 24-0 at halftime, perhaps a little bit more. South Carolina State was able to cause a turnover, but it could not capitalize on that turnover either. I thought in the first half, and I thought, first of all, that game was on ABC, which was really, really big. That was great. Prior to the game, Diddy making his pledge that he promised last year to make to Jackson State of $1 million, and that presentation happened as well, and that was big. I think, obviously it was big for Jackson State, but for that kind of deal to have happened and been a part of what was the discussion on the national broadcast, I thought was really, really good. I think Jay Walker made a good point during the broadcast that Jackson State was much more physical than South Carolina State was, and to the point that when you generally think about MEAC football, it's more of defensive minded. There's going to be some offense, mostly running the football. When you think about SWAC, it's a little bit more wide open, more of an aerial attack. But I thought he hit on the point perfectly where he said Jackson State was more of the aggressor. And it certainly was, particularly in the first half. Had some opportunities, only had the 17-0 lead, but then opened it up in the second half, and it was on from there. I thought that South Carolina State just didn't look. They were able to run the football to some degree. Got to get better quarterback play. I realize Corey Fields is coming off missing the last half of last season, but they're going to have to get better quarterback play. I think the run game was solid, but that South Carolina State defense, which we know is a really good defense, was not on at all. I think that some of that was in part to Jackson State, who I thought played extremely well offensively. I thought Jason Brown, I thought he would be the starter of the three quarterbacks going in because he had the most experience. And, first half was solid, but second half was really, really good. He opened things up, finished 25 of 29 with 356 yards with 3 touchdowns, did not throw an interception, aided by that run game that had in excess of 150 yards rushing, led by Mulligan, who had 90 yards on the ground. J.D. Martin was a bruiser in that backfield as well. So I thought from an offensive perspective, Jackson State looked good, particularly in the second half. And South Carolina State couldn't get much of a pass rush. The Bulldogs were able to cause a fumble there in the first half, but getting beat in the secondary, your linebacker play, and then that defensive line was really just getting blown. Not only was the defensive line getting blown off the football, and that Jackson State offensive line was extremely tough, but those running backs were getting those yards after contacts, delivering blows themselves. So I thought Jackson State did an absolutely tremendous job, really offensively. And then defensively, I thought that South Carolina, Jackson State did a good job, but you look at it and really, you're talking about a team that was able to really run that football, and you're talking about a South Carolina State team that did a fairly decent job of running the football. But let's look at some of South Carolina State's numbers. Corey Fields, 5 of 17 for 59 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. That's not going to get it done. And I looked at some numbers for Corey Fields. So in his career, he's 17-13 in games in which he's played for South Carolina State. In the wins, he's, first of all, in his career, he's a 49% completion, or has a 49% completion percentage. And throughout the course of his career, he has thrown 47 touchdowns to 28 interceptions in his career. Now, in the victories for South Carolina State, he's completed 51% of his passes for 3,220 yards, 31 touchdowns to 5 interceptions. And obviously part of those victories includes that victory over Jackson State, going back to the Celebration Bowl in 2021. In the losses, he is completing just 46% of his passes at 165 yards per game, with 16 touchdowns to 23 interceptions. So, and we'll talk a little bit more. I'll talk a little bit more about this on Takeaway Tuesday on tomorrow. But for South Carolina State, I think to have success this year, it's going to have to begin with the play of Corey Fields offensively. The running game, I think, is going to be pretty good, but Corey Fields is definitely going to have to do and be a little bit more consistent and they're going to have to, or the Bulldogs are going to have to get more consistent play from that quarterback position. Now, again, he's coming off the injury, missed half the season last year, the latter half of the season due to injury. I know that Buddy Pugh and his staff very high on Fields. And again, you look at some of the things he's been able to do in the course of his career in wins. He looks very, very good. So those are my thoughts on the South Carolina State and Jackson State game. I'm going to have takeaways from the opening week of HBCU football on tomorrow. Meanwhile, it was Langston falling to MNU 24-21 in overtime. Okay. MNU was able to actually get a field goal in overtime, and then it was a situation where you're looking at Langston, and Langston missed a field goal in overtime, which led to the victory or the loss by Langston in that football game. Langston could not throw the football, didn't do a good job of throwing the football at all. Obviously Langston ran the ball reasonably well, but when you're talking about throwing the football, as I look at some of the numbers right here, unable to really throw the football in this game. I'm going to take a look at some of the numbers, and Langston able to really run the football in this game. You look at the rushing yards. T. Travis had 84 yards rushing, and he led, of course, the Lions in rushing in this football game. You're talking about a Lions team that was really able to get it done in terms of rushing the football, as a matter of fact, for 250 yards, but only able to pass for 104 yards. And meanwhile, MNU was able to pass for 296 yards, but Langston did a good job of stopping the run. It's not the kind of season that Quentin Morgan, the head coach, or I shouldn't say the season, but it's not the kind of game and the kind of start that Quentin Morgan wants for this ball club against Mid-America Nazarene University. And so a loss for Langston to start the season in overtime. They're going to have to rebound. And I believe Langston may be off next week and then play a game off and then, jump right back into it, if I'm not mistaken. And so we'll see how Langston is able to, to sort of bounce back from that loss. Meanwhile, Florida Memorial falling in the football game, 50 to 47 in its opening football game to open the season. And so Bluefield able to get the victory, not Bluefield State, but Bluefield able to get the victory over Florida Memorial in the first game of the season. And if you're Florida Memorial, you look at the quarterback play. Williams, 25 of 44, 306 yards, 1 touchdown. He had 3 interceptions, but Florida Memorial was really able to run the football. As a matter of fact, Florida Memorial had, a couple of touchdown lead in the second half and really couldn't hold on to that football game. George Young, Walter Wilbon combined to rush for 298 yards and 5 touchdowns for Florida Memorial in the football game, but FMU could not get it done to open the season. So 3 games to open the season. Jackson State comes away with the victory over South Carolina State. Langston falls to Mid-America Nazarene 24-21. And then Florida Memorial falls to Bluefield 50-47, a high-scoring game there for Florida Memorial. On tomorrow's edition of the HBCU Football Daily Podcast, we're going to take a look. Okay, I'm going to take a look. Some takeaways from these respective football games, these 3 football games. I'm going to have some takeaways from these football games. Later, it depends on when you're watching or listening to this HBCU Football Daily Podcast. Later on today, we may have already done it, depending upon when you're listening or watching, but we will name the HBCU National Player of the Week from opening week. So that's it for today's HBCU Football Daily Podcast. Don't forget to tell a couple of friends about the HBCU Football Daily Podcast, where you can watch on the BOXTOROW YouTube channel, as well as on BOXTOROW.com and iHeartMedia. I'm going to talk with you tomorrow.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the HBCU Football Daily Podcast. You can also listen to the podcast at BOXTOROW.com, iHeartMedia, or wherever you get your podcasts. Don't forget to get your HBCU football fix on BOXTOROW with Donal Ware each weekend on the radio station near you, and on SiriusXM on HBCU, Channel 142, and on ESPNU Radio on SiriusXM, Channel 84. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram at BOXTOROW for the latest in HBCU football, and don't forget to tell a friend.